Welcome to Crossdressing Stories. Here, we share personal stories, celebrate self-expression. If you're on your own journey or simply curious, you've found your community. Subscribe and join the conversation.
The smell of failure was dust and silence. For 20 years, Alex Thompson's world had smelled of sawdust, fresh concrete, and the sharp, metallic tang of welding. He was a builder. With his calloused hands and sun-worn face, he had built a small but respected construction company from the ground up. Thompson Construction was his identity, his pride, his entire world. Now it was a ghost. A major commercial project, a gleaming glass-and-steel office building that was meant to be his masterpiece, had turned into his tombstone. The developer, a faceless corporation from overseas, had declared bankruptcy overnight, their promises dissolving into legal jargon and unanswered emails. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Alex had poured everything into that job, his company's capital, a second mortgage on his house, his entire future. He stood in the cavernous, half-finished lobby, the wind whistling through the empty window frames. The bank had already seized the equipment. The foreclosure notice was taped to the door of the home he no longer owned. His savings account contained less than $100. At 39 years old, he was ruined. For a week, he slept on a friend's couch, the shame so heavy it felt like a physical weight on his chest. He was a man who solved problems, who commanded respect on a job site, who provided for others. Now, he couldn't even afford a cup of coffee. He searched for jobs, but his reputation was now tied to the biggest construction failure in the city's recent history. No one would touch him. As the final dregs of his pride evaporated, he was left with one last, terrifying option. A phone number he hadn't dialed in over a decade. It belonged to his estranged stepsister, Isabella Du Bois. She was older, the product of his father's first, wealthy marriage. When his father had left her mother for Alex's, a bitter resentment was born that never faded. Isabella was everything he wasn't. Old money, ruthlessly polished, and successful in a world of art and aesthetics that he found frivolous. He hadn't seen her since their father's funeral, where she had looked at him with cold, dismissive eyes. But she was also his only hope. Swallowing the bile that rose in his throat, he picked up his phone. He was a man who built things, and now he had to beg a woman who delighted in breaking them. Isabella's penthouse was on the top floor of the city's most exclusive residential tower, a sterile palace of white marble, glass, and chrome that seemed to float above the clouds. The air was cool and smelled faintly of lilies and expensive perfume. Alex, in his worn jeans and faded work shirt, felt like a dirty stray who had wandered into a museum. Isabella didn't get up when he was shown in by her silent, uniformed housekeeper. She was perched on a low, white leather sofa, holding a delicate teacup. She was in her late 40s, impeccably preserved, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on the scuffs on his work boots with faint disgust. "Alexander," she said, her voice smooth and cool as the marble around them. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" His prepared speech died in his throat. He just stood there, a giant, awkward man in a room designed for delicate things. "I'm in trouble, Isabella," he mumbled, the words feeling clumsy and thick. "The company, it's gone. Everything's gone. I read about it in the financial pages," she replied, taking a slow sip of tea. There was no sympathy in her voice, only a detached, clinical interest. "A rather spectacular implosion. Daddy would have been so disappointed in your lack of foresight." The jab hit its mark, and a hot flush of anger rose in his chest. But he choked it down. He was the beggar here, not the challenger. "I need help. Alone. Just enough to get back on my feet. I'll pay you back, every cent, with interest." Isabella placed her teacup down with a soft click. She rose and walked towards the floor-to-ceiling windows, her silk robe whispering against the floor. She looked out over the city, her city. "Alone," she mused, as if tasting a new and interesting word. "No, I don't think so. Alone implies you have the capacity to repay it. You, my dear brother, have nothing. You are a liability." His hope, already a flickering candle, was extinguished. Then, "I'm sorry for wasting your time," he said, turning to leave. "I didn't say I wouldn't help you," she said, her voice stopping him in his tracks. "I said I wouldn't give you a loan. I have a different kind of proposition. It's a job of sorts." He turned back, wary. What kind of job? I'm a builder. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Oh, I'm well aware of what you were. But that man is of no use to me. The position I have in mind requires a very different set of skills. It requires subtlety, grace, and an absolute lack of masculine ego. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. I need a personal assistant, a companion, someone to manage my social calendar, accompany me to events, and see to my needs. It is a demanding role, one that requires complete devotion and discretion. Alex stared at her, confused. An assistant? Isabella, I don't know the first thing about that world. Precisely, she said, her eyes glittering. Which is why you're perfect. You're a blank slate, one that I can mold. But there's a condition, of course. A rather significant one. She walked towards him, circling him slowly, her gaze analytical, as if she were a sculptor sizing up a rough block of stone. The man who runs my father's trust, the trust that holds my inheritance, is a deeply old-fashioned, religious man. He believes a woman of my standing should be settled, preferably with a gentle, female companion to soften my harsher edges. He finds my single, independent life distasteful. Having you around, a rough, failed construction worker, would only confirm his biases. She stopped in front of him, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. So, my new assistant won't be my brother, Alex. She will be my distant cousin, a quiet, unassuming young woman. Her name will be Anya. Alex stared at her, the silence in the room broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, a sound escaped him, a harsh, dry bark of a laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor, full of disbelief and despair. You're insane, he said, the words coming out as a choked whisper. Completely and utterly insane. You want me to dress up like a woman? To pretend to be someone named Anya? For how long? Forever. Isabella's smile didn't waver. Insane, Alexander? Is it more insane than sleeping on a stained sofa in a one-bedroom apartment that smells of stale beer? Is it more insane than having a negative balance in your bank account? Is it more insane than being a walking monument to failure? Each question was a precise, deliberate stab. This is sick, he shot back, his voice regaining some of its strength. It's a game to you. Some twisted way to humiliate me because of Dad. Don't flatter yourself, she said coolly, turning to refresh her tea from a silver pot. This isn't about the past. This is about my future and a problem you can solve. You see, you are a rock. A big, stubborn, graceless rock. But even a rock can be carved. She faced him again, her expression hardening into one of pure business. So, here's the offer. You will live here, in the guest suite. You will want for nothing, food, clothing, a generous stipend for incidentals. In return, you will cease to be Alex Thompson. He is a ghost, a bad debt. You will become Anya Dubois. You will learn what I teach you. You will do as I say, without question or complaint. You will be my shadow, my confidant, and my perfect, loyal companion. She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. Or, you can walk out that door right now. You can take your masculine pride with you and see what it's worth on the street. You can try to find a homeless shelter that isn't full. The choice is yours, Alexander. The cage or the abyss. The ultimatum hung in the air, cold and absolute. He looked past her, through the vast windows at the city below. He saw the cold, hard pavement, the indifferent crowds. He thought of the gnawing hunger in his belly, the bone-deep weariness of having nowhere to go. He thought of the utter finality of his failure. He was a builder whose foundations had crumbled to dust. He looked at her unyielding face, at the chilling certainty in her eyes. She knew she had won before she had even made the offer. He was trapped, and the gilded bars of this cage were the only thing keeping him from falling. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight drained out of him, leaving a hollow, aching void. Fine, he whispered, the single word tasting like ash in his mouth. A triumphant, almost imperceptible smile touched Isabella's lips. Excellent, she said softly. Don't make any plans for tomorrow. My team will be here at 9 sharp. We have a lot of work to do to find Anya and all of that. Her gaze swept over his body one last time, not with disgust now, but with the appraising eye of an artist about to begin a radical new sculpture. The team arrived at 9 o'clock, not with a whisper but with the quiet, confident clicks of expensive shoes on the marble floor. There were 3 of them, a severe-looking woman with a measuring tape draped around her neck, a young man who carried an enormous silver case like it was a nuclear football, and the man who was clearly in charge, Julian. He was impossibly thin, dressed in black, with sharp, bird-like features and a bored expression that suggested he had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. Alex was instructed to sit in a single, high-back chair they had placed in the middle of the living room, facing the wall of windows that acted as a giant, unforgiving mirror. Isabella directed the proceedings from her white sofa, a queen overseeing the remaking of her kingdom. "Let's begin with the demolition," Julian said, his voice a bored, nasal drawl. He circled Alex, his fingers prodding Alex's hair with distaste. "This rustic mess has to go. All of it." Before Alex could process what was happening, a plastic cape was snapped around his neck. He watched his own reflection, a grim-faced stranger, as Julian picked up a pair of shears. The first snip was cold and final against his scalp. He felt a strange, detached sense of loss as chunks of his thick, dark hair fell to the floor. For 20 years, he'd had the same simple haircut. It was a part of him. Now, it was just debris on Isabella's pristine floor. Julian worked with terrifying speed, the shears and a buzzing razor shearing away the last vestiges of the man he was. When he was done, his hair was gone, replaced by a short, soft, and utterly shapeless style that exposed the shape of his skull. It was a neutering. "Better," Julian declared. "Now, for the rest of the canvas." The young man opened the silver case, revealing a terrifying arsenal of waxes, creams, and sharp-looking tools. The next hour was a blur of methodical humiliation. His face was scrubbed, exfoliated, and then subjected to a painfully close shave, far closer than he had ever shaved himself. His thick eyebrows were plucked and shaped, each pull of the tweezers a sharp, stinging torment. The worst part was the waxing. He was forced to remove his shirt, and hot, sticky wax was applied to his chest and back, then ripped away in brutal strips. The pain was sharp and searing, bringing tears to his eyes, but he bit his lip and endured it in stony silence, refusing to give Isabella the satisfaction of seeing him cry out. They did his arms. They did his legs. Every patch of hair that marked him as a man was systematically, painfully erased. When it was over, his skin was red, raw, and screaming with irritation. He felt alien in his own body. He cautiously touched his chest, his leg. The skin was impossibly smooth, like a stranger's. It felt profoundly, disturbingly wrong. "Turn him around," Isabella commanded. Julian spun the chair to face her. Alex kept his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to look at her, unable to confront his own reflection. "Look at me, Anya," Isabella said, her voice soft but laced with steel. Slowly, reluctantly, he lifted his head. He saw his reflection in the windows. He didn't see a woman. He saw a freak. A man's rugged, square-jawed face, now framed by soft, short hair. A man's broad shoulders, now smooth and bare. He looked like a half-finished statue, a bizarre, androgynous creature stripped of all its defining features. He was no longer Alex Thompson, but he was certainly not a woman. He was nothing. A blank slate. "Good," Isabella said with chilling satisfaction. "The foundation is clean. Now, we can begin to build." If the morning was about demolition, the afternoon was about construction. But Alex was no longer the builder. He was the material. The severe-looking woman, a couturier named Helene, approached him with her measuring tape. Her hands were cold and impersonal as she measured every part of his body, his chest, his waist, his hips, the length of his arms and legs. She scribbled numbers into a leather-bound notebook, tooting under her breath. "The shoulders are a problem," she announced to Isabella, "and the hips are non-existent. We'll need structure, padding, and a very good foundation." Julian's assistant returned with several large, unmarked boxes. From the first, he produced a collection of garments that made Alex's stomach clench. They weren't clothes. They were instruments of engineering. Helene held up a piece of beige elastic and steel that looked like a piece of industrial equipment. "The corset," she stated, "essential for creating a waistline." Getting him into it was a two-person job. Alex was forced to stand, arms raised, as Helene wrapped the constricting garment around his torso. It was brutally tight, digging into his ribs and forcing the air from his lungs. She pulled the laces at the back, cinching it until he could barely breathe. The sensation was suffocating, a cage being built around his very core. Next came a set of padded undergarments, designed to create the illusion of hips and a softer, more rounded backside. They felt bulky and absurd. Then came the most disorienting piece, a breast form. It was a silicone prosthesis, surprisingly heavy and realistic, that was fitted into a specialized pocket bra. The weight on his chest was a constant, bizarre presence, shifting with his movements. He felt like a walking lie, his body a collection of artificial parts. Finally, Helene selected a simple, high-necked, long-sleeve dress made of a heavy, dark gray wool. It was designed to conceal, not reveal, to suggest a shape rather than show one. The fabric was itchy and unforgiving. As he looked at his reflection, he saw the silhouette of a woman. It was a clumsy, awkward shape, but it was undeniably female. The broad shoulders were softened, the waist was defined, and there was the gentle curve of a bust and hips. The man underneath was gone, buried under layers of padding and steel. The final phase belonged to Julian. "The face is the focal point," he declared, pushing Alex back into the chair in front of a new, brightly lit vanity mirror. "We can't change the bones, but we can change the light." The makeup application was an intimate and unnerving process. Julian's hands were steady as he applied layer after layer. A cool, liquid foundation to hide the roughness of his skin and the shadow of his beard. A soft powder that tickled his nose. A dusting of blush on his cheeks that felt like a brand. He was taught how to hold his face, how to relax his jaw. The most transformative part was the eyes. Eyeliner felt like a tiny, sharp wire against his lash line. Mascara was a cold, wet brush that made him want to blink furiously. Julian meticulously applied subtle shades of brown and taupe eyeshadow, working to create the illusion of a softer, wider eye shape. He filled in the newly shaped brows, defining them. The final touch was a neutral, rose-colored lipstick, slick and waxy on his lips. "Now," Julian whispered. "Open." Alex opened his eyes. The person staring back from the mirror was a stranger. It was a woman. Not a beautiful woman, but a plausible one. Her face was plain and somber, with large, sad-looking eyes and a face that seemed softer, more delicate than his own. The harsh lines of his jaw were still there, but they were muted, blurred by the artistry of the makeup. He could see himself in her eyes, a terrified prisoner looking out from behind a stranger's face. "Her name is Anya," Isabella said from behind him, her voice a soft, final pronouncement. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." The creation of Anya's appearance was only the first step. The far more difficult task was teaching the man trapped inside how to animate the puppet. Alex's lessons began the next day, and they were relentless. Isabella was a merciless instructor, dissecting his every move, his every sound, with cold precision. The first lesson was walking. Helene had left behind several pairs of shoes. They started with what she called a sensible kitten heel, a small, 1-inch heel that looked deceptively harmless. To Alex, who had spent his life in steel-toed work boots, they were instruments of torture. His feet, accustomed to the flat, solid ground, were forced into an unnatural arch. His weight was pitched forward onto the balls of his feet. The shoes pinched his toes and scraped his heels. "You're stomping, Alexander. You sound like a panicked horse," Isabella criticized from her sofa. "Anya is not a horse. She is a whisper. The steps must be smaller, lighter. From the hip. Let the hip guide the leg, not the other way around." He tried. He wobbled across the vast living room, his ankles threatening to buckle, his entire body tense with the effort of just staying upright. The corset he was forced to wear again made deep breaths impossible, and the padded hips felt like they were throwing his balance off. He was intensely aware of the click-clack-click of the heels on the marble, each sound an advertisement of his failure. "Better," she would say, though it never felt better. "But your shoulders are too rigid. A woman doesn't lead with her shoulders. Soften them. Let them fall." Hour after hour, he walked, back and forth across that marble floor until his feet were blistered and raw, and a deep ache had settled in his lower back. The next lesson was sitting. "You cannot just collapse into a chair," Isabella explained. "It is an act of grace. Approach the chair, turn, and lower yourself slowly. Keep your knees together. Always keep your knees together." She made him practice getting in and out of a chair 100 times. "Cross your legs at the ankle, not the knee. It is more modest, more elegant. Then came the voice. Isabella hired a specialist, a severe older woman who taught opera singers. She made Alex do hours of breathing exercises, forcing him to speak from his diaphragm in a way that felt completely unnatural. The male voice resonates in the chest, the tutor explained, her fingers pressing against his breastbone. We must lift it up into the head. She made him practice scales, pushing his voice into a higher register until his throat was hoarse. It wasn't about making him sound exactly like a biological woman, but about softening the deep, masculine timbre of his speech, filing off the rough edges. He was taught to modulate his tone, to end sentences on a rising, questioning inflection. Don't state, suggest. Isabella would correct him during their mock conversations. Anya is not confrontational. She is agreeable. She is pleasant. Every part of his natural existence was being systematically deconstructed and rebuilt into something foreign. The way he walked, sat, stood, and spoke. Nothing was his own anymore. In the evenings, when he was finally allowed to retreat to his room, he would strip off the layers of his new identity. The dress, the heels, the corset, the padding. He would stand in front of the bathroom mirror and stare at the man underneath. He looked paler, softer, and in his eyes, there was a look of profound exhaustion and a creeping, terrifying sense of loss. He was beginning to forget what it felt like to just be. After a week of intensive training, Isabella decided it was time for a trial run. Anya needs to learn to navigate the real world, she announced one morning over breakfast. We're going to the museum. The panic that seized Alex was cold and immediate. It was one thing to perform in the sterile, controlled environment of the penthouse, but to go out in public, under the scrutiny of hundreds of strangers' eyes, it felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. The preparation was even more meticulous than usual. Julian was summoned again. A wig was introduced, a simple, shoulder-length bob in a soft chestnut brown that was expertly fitted over his own short hair. The feeling of it was itchy and claustrophobic. The makeup was applied with a lighter hand, a daytime look, as Julian called it. The chosen outfit was a conservative tweed skirt suit, paired with sheer stockings and the dreaded kitten heels. Remember your lessons, Isabella coached as they stood by the elevator. Small steps, shoulders back, chin up, but not too high. You are demure, not arrogant, and you do not speak unless spoken to. The ride down in the mirrored elevator was agony. Alex, no. Anya stared at her reflection. A tall, plain-looking woman in a severe suit stood next to the elegant, poised Isabella. The woman looked terrified, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles were white. The city hit him like a physical blow. The noise, the smells, the sheer number of people. Every person who glanced in their direction felt like a judge and jury. He was sure they could all see through the disguise. He was sure they could see the terrified man hiding under the tweed and the wig. He kept his eyes fixed on the pavement in front of him, focusing on placing one heeled foot in front of the other. The museum was quieter, but the sense of scrutiny was even more intense. The vast, echoing halls amplified the sound of his heels. He walked beside Isabella, a half-step behind as instructed, his posture rigid. He could feel the eyes of other patrons on them. Were they looking at Isabella, the well-known socialite, or were they looking at her strange, awkward companion? A small child, no older than 5, pointed at him. "Mommy, that lady is so tall," the boy said in a loud, clear voice. Alex's blood ran cold. He froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it, the moment of discovery. The mother, flustered, quickly shushed her son. "Don't be rude, honey," she whispered, pulling him away. She shot Alex a brief, apologetic smile. It was a normal, everyday interaction. She had seen a woman, a tall woman, and nothing more. The relief that washed over him was so intense it made his knees weak. He had passed. The disguise, the artifice, it had worked. For the first time that day, he risked looking up. He saw a group of women his own age, laughing together as they looked at a painting. He saw how they stood, how they gestured, how they interacted with a casual, unthinking ease. It was a language he was trying to learn by rote, while for them it was a mother tongue. Later, as they sat in the museum's quiet cafe, Isabella ordered them both tea. A waiter approached their table. "And for you, ma'am?" he asked, looking directly at Alex. "Just tea. Thank you," he managed to say, his voice a soft, practiced alto. "Of course, ma'am," the waiter said with a polite nod before leaving. Isabella watched him, a small, knowing smile on her face. "You see," she said softly, "the world will see what it is told to see. You are no longer Alex. He is gone. There is only Anya." As he sat there, trapped in his itchy suit and painful shoes, Alex realized the most terrifying truth of all. In that moment, in the eyes of the world, she was right. The true test, the entire reason for this elaborate and cruel charade, came a week later. Mr. Abernathy, the trustee of Isabella's inheritance, was coming for his annual review and luncheon. He was, according to Isabella, a fossil from a bygone era, a man whose moral and social compass was firmly stuck in the 1950s. "He controls the purse strings to the family trust," Isabella explained as Julian did Anya's makeup that morning. "The trust provides the bulk of my income. My father, in his infinite wisdom, saddled me with Abernathy to ensure I didn't squander it on frivolous artistic pursuits or, God forbid, enjoy myself too much. He must be managed." The pressure was immense. Alex felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach that had nothing to do with the corset, which was laced even tighter than usual today. The chosen outfit was the pinnacle of conservative femininity, a knee-length, pleated navy blue dress with a white Peter Pan collar and a matching navy cardigan. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his makeup subtle, and on his feet were a new pair of sensible but agonizingly uncomfortable black pumps. Isabella had also added a final touch, a delicate silver locket. "It was my mother's," she said. "It adds a touch of sentiment. Abernathy appreciates sentiment." Mr. Abernathy arrived precisely at noon. He was a small, thin man in his 70s with a halo of white hair, a stern face, and eyes that seemed to peer right through you. He greeted Isabella with a stiff, formal nod. "Isabella," he said, his voice dry as old paper. "Mr. Abernathy, it's a pleasure to see you. Please, come in," Isabella replied, her own voice a model of warmth and deference. "I'd like you to meet my cousin, Anya Dubois. Anya, this is Mr. Abernathy." Alex's heart was pounding. This was the performance of a lifetime. He rose slowly from his chair as he had been taught. He kept his eyes slightly downcast. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir," he said, his voice a soft, breathy whisper. He extended his hand, not for a handshake, but in a delicate, hesitant gesture. Abernathy took his hand, his grip surprisingly firm. His sharp eyes scanned Anya from head to toe, taking in the modest dress, the simple jewelry, the demure posture. "Miss Dubois," he said, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "You are taller than I expected." "Anya has always been a bit of a willow tree," Isabella interjected smoothly, guiding them towards the dining room. "But she has the gentlest soul." The luncheon was the most excruciating 2 hours of Alex's life. He sat ramrod straight, his knees pressed together, his hands folded in his lap. He ate with small, delicate bites, remembering to dab his lips with his napkin, not wipe them. He said almost nothing, only offering quiet, one-word answers when Abernathy occasionally directed a question his way. "And what is it you do, Miss Dubois?" the old man asked. I assist Isabella," he replied softly. "She is a wonderful companion," Isabella added. "So organized. And she has a wonderful eye for floral arrangements." Abernathy seemed to approve. He saw a quiet, plain, and utterly unthreatening female companion. He saw a stabilizing influence on the flighty and artistic Isabella. Alex felt himself disappearing, shrinking under the weight of the old man's patriarchal gaze. He was not a person in that room. He was a prop, a carefully constructed illusion designed to placate a dinosaur. As Abernathy was leaving, he turned to Anya one last time. "It is good to see Isabella with family," he said, a hint of warmth finally entering his voice. "A woman of her station should not be alone. You are a credit to her, young lady." After the door closed, Isabella leaned against it, a long sigh of relief escaping her lips. She turned to Alex, a rare, genuine smile of triumph on her face. "Perfect," she breathed. "You were absolutely perfect." She poured 2 glasses of champagne. "A toast to Anya, my $1 million companion." She handed him a glass. He took it, his hand trembling slightly. He had done it. He had secured her fortune. He had cemented his own prison. He looked at his reflection in the golden liquid and saw only the sad, trapped eyes of a woman named Anya. The days after Abernathy's visit settled into a strange and suffocating routine. With the trustee placated, Anya's presence was now a permanent fixture of Isabella's life. Alex's old life, his very name, felt like a distant, half-forgotten dream. He was Anya now, from the moment he woke and strapped himself into his foundational garments to the moment he was allowed to peel them off in the privacy of his room. He accompanied Isabella everywhere, to gallery openings, charity luncheons, designer fittings. He became her shadow, a silent, gracefully moving figure in the background. He learned the art of the nod and the polite, non-committal smile. He could navigate a crowded room in heels without stumbling and could balance a tiny plate of hors d'oeuvres and a glass of champagne with practiced ease. The world no longer saw him as a man. He was ma'am, miss, darling. Women would share conspiratorial smiles with him in the powder room. Men would hold doors open for him, their eyes either gliding over his plain face without a second thought or, occasionally, lingering with a look of faint pity for Isabella's drab companion. But the performance was taking its toll. The constant vigilance, the physical discomfort of the clothes, the suppression of every natural impulse, it was grinding him down. He started having nightmares where he would try to shout, but only a high-pitched whisper would come out. He would look in the mirror and, for a terrifying split second, fail to see the man underneath the makeup. The crack in the facade appeared during a quiet, rainy afternoon. Isabella was out at a board meeting, and he had a few rare hours to himself. He was in the vast library, dusting Isabella's collection of art books as instructed. He was wearing a simple, comfortable for Anya house dress and flat shoes. He pulled out a heavy, leather-bound volume on modern architecture. As he opened it, the familiar smell of old paper and ink filled his senses. He began flipping through the pages, his fingers tracing the clean lines of the buildings. He saw blueprints, cross-sections, images of steel skeletons reaching for the sky. It was the language of his old life, a language he understood in his bones. He came across a photograph of a construction site. He could almost smell the wet concrete and hear the roar of the machinery. He saw men in hard hats and dusty boots, their faces grim with concentration. He saw their easy camaraderie, the way they moved with a confident, physical power. A wave of profound, gut-wrenching grief washed over him. It wasn't just a job he had lost. It was a whole part of himself. The part that could build, that could create, that could stand under the hot sun and feel the satisfying ache of a hard day's work in his muscles. Anya didn't build things. Anya dusted them. Without thinking, he walked to the grand piano that sat in the corner of the room. He didn't know how to play, but his father had. He sat on the bench, his posture perfect, his knees together, just as he had been taught. He slowly, deliberately, placed his hands on the keys. His hands, once calloused and strong, were now soft and smooth from the lotions and manicures Isabella insisted upon. He pressed down. Instead of a chord, there was only a discordant, clanging noise. It was the sound of a system breaking. It was the sound of his own soul. He let his head fall forward, resting his forehead against the cool, polished wood of the piano. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he wept. Not silent, dignified tears, but deep, ragged, silent sobs that shook his entire frame. The desperate, unheard cries of a man trapped inside a woman's clothes. Isabella, sensing a need to keep her creation occupied and prevent any further displays of unsettling melancholy, decided Anya needed a gentle, feminine hobby. She decreed that Anya would take over the management of the penthouse's extensive rooftop terrace garden. The garden was a masterpiece of landscape architecture, a lush oasis of exotic flowers, manicured shrubs, and artfully arranged stone paths, all with a breathtaking view of the city. It was tended to twice a week by a professional gardening service. It was there that Alex met him. The company sent a new man one Tuesday morning. He was young, in his late 20s, with sun-streaked brown hair that was always falling into his eyes, a kind, open face, and hands that were stained with honest dirt. His name was Leo. Unlike the polished, sterile people of Isabella's world, Leo was real. He moved with an easy, unself-conscious physicality, hauling bags of soil and trimming branches with a practiced skill that Alex, the former builder, could deeply appreciate. The first time they spoke, it was about a struggling Japanese maple. Alex, as Anya, was on the terrace, dutifully watering pots as instructed. Leo approached him, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a gloved hand. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice warm and friendly. "I noticed you were giving this one a lot of water. These maples, they're tricky. They hate having wet feet. You're better off letting the soil get almost dry before you water again." Alex looked from the watering can to Leo's smiling face. He was used to being invisible or being treated with a formal, distant politeness. He wasn't used to this easy, genuine kindness. "Oh," he said, his Anya voice coming out softer than he intended. I didn't know. Thank you." "No problem," Leo said with a grin. "It's what I'm here for." "Name's Leo." "Anya," he replied automatically. From then on, their Tuesday and Friday mornings became a quiet routine. Leo would work, and Alex would find reasons to be on the terrace. He would ask questions about fertilizer, about pruning, about how to tell the difference between a weed and a perennial. Leo, in turn, would answer patiently, never condescending, always happy to share his knowledge. He talked about soil composition with the same passion Alex used to talk about load-bearing walls. He spoke about the challenges of protecting delicate blossoms from the harsh wind at this altitude. He was a builder, just like Alex had been. His materials were just soil and sunlight instead of steel and concrete. For the first time in months, Alex felt something other than despair or resignation. He was having a real conversation. He wasn't performing. He was just a person talking to another person about a shared interest. Leo didn't see a socialite's strange companion. He saw a quiet woman who was interested in his work. One Friday, Leo was struggling to move a massive, heavy terracotta pot. He was grunting with the effort, trying to shift it a few feet to a sunnier spot. Alex watched for a moment. Then an old, forgotten instinct took over. He put down his small watering can, walked over, and bent his knees, getting a firm grip on the other side of the pot. "On three," he said, his voice coming out a little lower, a little rougher than Anya's usually was. Leo looked up, surprised, but then he grinned. "All right. 1, 2, 3. Together, they lifted. It was heavy, but the familiar strain in his back and shoulders felt good, real. They moved the pot to its new spot. Alex stood up, breathing a little heavily, and wiped a smudge of dirt from his hand, forgetting for a second the perfectly manicured nails. Leo was looking at him with a new expression, a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Wow," he said. "You're a lot stronger than you look, Anya." Alex just smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. And in that moment, standing in the rooftop sun, with the smell of dirt in the air, he didn't feel like Alex, and he didn't feel like Anya. He just felt, for the first time in a very long time, like himself. The small moments of authenticity with Leo on the rooftop became the anchor for Alex's sanity. He found himself counting the days, the hours, until Tuesday and Friday mornings. Their conversations deepened, moving from the technicalities of gardening to something more personal. Leo talked about his dream of one day owning a small nursery. Alex, as Anya, found himself carefully editing his own past, talking vaguely about a family business that had failed, framing it in a way that sounded like a boutique or a small shop. The slip, when it came, was inevitable. They were discussing a new plan for a section of the terrace, sketching ideas on a spare piece of paper. Leo was talking about building a new raised planter box. "You'll want to use cedar," Alex said, his voice dropping into its old, natural register. "It has the best rot resistance. And make sure you use galvanized deck screws, not nails. You'll get better shear strength, and it won't pull apart when the wood expands and contracts." He tapped the drawing. "And you should really lay a gravel foundation for drainage, otherwise the base will rot out in 2 years. He stopped, the silence suddenly deafening. He had spoken as Alex the builder, with the confident, practical authority of a man who knew his materials. He hadn't spoken as Anya, the quiet, agreeable companion. Leo stopped sketching. He slowly looked up, his friendly eyes now filled with a quiet, searching curiosity. He wasn't looking at Anya's face. He was looking at the person behind it. "You talk about that like you've built a few things in your time," Leo said, his voice gentle, not accusatory. "That's more than just a casual tip from a gardening magazine." Alex's heart hammered. His mind raced, searching for a lie, an excuse. But looking at Leo's open, honest face, the exhaustion of the constant performance overwhelmed him. He couldn't do it. Not with him. My old life? Alex said, the words coming out in a pained whisper. It was different. Anya is a role, one I'm forced to play. He didn't explain more, but the confession hung in the air between them, fragile and enormous. Leo was silent for a long moment, studying him. Alex braced himself for disbelief, for ridicule, for the inevitable rejection. Instead, Leo just nodded slowly, as if he were piecing together a puzzle he had been looking at for weeks. I figured it was something like that, he said softly. There's a sadness in your eyes, even when you're smiling. It never seemed to fit. He put his pencil down. Well, for what it's worth, I like the person I talked to up here. The one who knows about deck screws. The simple, unconditional acceptance was like a key turning in a lock Alex had forgotten existed. It was a validation not of Anya, but of the man trapped inside. Look, Leo said, his expression sincere. This is probably way out of line. But would you ever want to get a coffee? Sometime when I'm not on the clock. Not as Isabella's assistant. Just as you. The offer was a lifeline thrown into his gilded cage. It was a chance to be real, even for an hour. It was a choice he hadn't had in months. The choice to be himself. But it was also an incredible risk. To be seen outside the penthouse, to break Isabella's absolute rule. The consequences were terrifying to imagine. He started, his mind a war of fear and a desperate, aching hope. I have to think about it. Later that day, Isabella found him staring out the window, his thoughts a million miles away. Stop daydreaming, Anya, she said, her voice sharp and cold, pulling him back to reality. You have invitations that need to be answered. My world doesn't stop just because you've discovered a fondness for dirt. He looked at her, then back at the city below. For the first time, he didn't just see the abyss he had feared. He saw a world of possibilities. A world with coffee shops, and honest work, and people like Leo. A world he wanted back. The question was no longer if he could escape. It was how. The decision, once made, settled in his bones with the solid certainty of a well-laid foundation. He spent the next few days in a state of quiet, focused calm. He performed his duties as Anya flawlessly, his voice soft, his movements graceful, but inside, Alex was making a plan. He found Leo on the roof the next Tuesday. I can't go for coffee, he said, and saw the flicker of disappointment in Leo's eyes. Not as Anya, but I need your help. He explained his situation in clipped, concise sentences, not with self-pity, but as a builder outlining a problem. He had no money of his own, no ID, no clothes, nothing that belonged to Alex Thompson. He was a prisoner. Leo listened, his expression shifting from concern to a quiet, determined anger on Alex's behalf. My cousin has a cabin upstate, Leo said when he was done. It's empty this time of year. You could go there. Lay low. Figure things out. He scribbled an address and a phone number on a piece of paper. There's a bus that leaves from the Port Authority at 7 a.m. every day. Be there on Friday morning. I'll meet you. I'll buy your ticket. Just get yourself out of here. The escape was terrifyingly simple. On Thursday night, while Isabella was at the opera, Alex went into her study. He found what he was looking for in a small, locked drawer in her desk, his old wallet containing his driver's license and a single, expired credit card. Isabella had kept it, a final trophy. He also took a thick stack of cash from a small safe she kept hidden behind a painting, enough to last him a few weeks. It wasn't stealing, it was back pay. He went back to his room. For the last time, he peeled off Anya's identity. The dress, the heels, the corset, the silicone prosthesis. He piled them all in a neat, funereal stack on the bed. He scrubbed the makeup from his face, washing away the last traces of the woman he had been forced to be. He looked in the mirror at his own face, pale and strange after so long. His hair was a soft, grown-out mess. He looked thinner, the sharp angles of his face more pronounced. But it was him. It was Alex. He found what he was looking for at the back of his closet. A simple, black uniform worn by Isabella's house staff, a pair of trousers, and a plain button-down shirt. They were the only male clothes in the entire apartment. He put them on. They fit awkwardly, but they were his armor. At 5 a.m. on Friday morning, he walked out of his room. He didn't look back. He took the service elevator down to the basement, walked out through a loading bay, and emerged into the cool, gray dawn of the city. The air of freedom was so crisp and clean it made him dizzy. He met Leo at the bus station, a grimy, bustling place full of real people with real lives. Leo handed him a ticket and a small duffel bag containing a change of clothes and some food. "You sure about this?" Leo asked, his eyes full of concern. "I've never been more sure of anything," Alex said, his voice his own, rough and deep and wonderful. He shook Leo's hand, a firm, man-to-man grip. "Thank you. I owe you one." "Just be safe," Leo said. "Call me when you get there." As the bus pulled away from the station, Alex looked out the window at the city. He thought of Isabella, waking up to find her perfect creation gone, her cage empty. There would be fury, but he felt no fear. He was no longer a prop in her world. He was a man on a bus, heading north with a few $100s in his pocket and an address for a place he'd never seen. He had lost everything, been unmade and remade, but he had survived. The bus rumbled on, carrying him away from the ghost of Anya Du Bois and towards the uncertain, terrifying, and beautiful prospect of rebuilding Alex Thompson, one piece at a time. He was a builder, after all, and for the first time in a long time, he had a foundation to build on, himself.